Okay, let's strike it while it's hot. Taking a look at all the prime lenses from Fujifilm except for two. One of them is the 56mm APD. This is the 56mm 1.2 Fujifilm lens. Do not have the APD. Also do not have Fujifilm's worst lens, which is the 18mm. Now, a lot of people said I was crazy for saying the 18mm was Fujifilm's worst lens. However, as it turns out, Fujifilm is redesigning that lens. So apparently I was 100% accurate because Fujifilm is redesigning the 18mm. Do not recommend buying it. It is slow and is noisy, and the image quality, while certainly more than decent enough, is not worth buying at any price unless someone is giving it to you. So those two lenses are not present. However, the 56mm APD is just a variation on the 56mm f1.2. Let's take a look at a few different criteria for lens recommendations because your needs are not my needs. Speed, autofocus speed. Because autofocus tracking and acquisition is not only camera side, it is certainly so lens side. Here we have linear motors in the 90mm. We have quad linear motors. We actually have stepper motors in these lenses over here. Some of these are some of Fujifilm's X-Trans lens, X lenses from a few years ago, and a few of these just rolled off in 2017 and 2016. So a lot faster and a lot quieter. So we're looking at speed, noise, video use, street use, portraiture, and action. Okay, speed, noise, video, street, portraiture, and action. I actually have these grouped specifically. The 23mm f1.4, also the 35mm f1.4. Both these came out about the same time. They're rather slow autofocus. However, they're perfect for street use. Both these are excellent. By the way, the lens hoods on the 16mm and the 23mm 1.4, those are do not come with the lens. Those are $90 editions from Fujifilm. They're CNC machined aluminum. The fastest prime lens that Fujifilm has is the 90mm f2 over here. Speed. Okay, let's start off with speed. All of these, the 16mm, the 23mm 1.4, the 35mm 1.4, and the 14mm 2.8 are roughly all the same speed. What is the slowest lens here? Well, actually, it's kind of a toss-up between the 27mm 2.8 and the 60mm f2.4. Not only, even on the speedy XT2, because while the XT2 is really fast in processing continuous autofocus tracking and acquisition is not only camera side, is also lens side. Both of these lenses are slow, painfully slow and noisy, even on the XT2. Painfully slow and noisy. The notion of using either one of these two for video work is an absolute non-starter. The noise is absolutely abysmal if you plan on adjusting your autofocus while doing video on the XT2 or even the XT20. I should have included the XT20 and also the X Pro 2. No dice on that unless you like torturing yourself. You're a masochist. So speed on both of those is the same. Actually, I've noticed no discernible difference. However, the 50mm seems to be, from testing, and I only recently acquired this, is the lens I was most hesitant to even think about buying because God knows I've got endless 50mm lenses that have incredible bokeh. However, the 50mm f2 from Fujifilm is not only fast, it does have cat's eye bokeh at f2. However, the micro contrast, the color saturation, and rendition from the 50mm f2 is absolutely stunning. I only wanted to test it, but I ended up buying it because it is that damn good. As far as speed, being in the same class, we have the 50mm, we have the 23mm f2, and the 35mm f2. Both of these are almost equally quiet and equally fast in autofocus on the X Pro 2, the XT20, and the XT2. However, the XT2 and X Pro 2 and XT20 have variations as far as autofocus speed and tracking and acquisition. The speed on these three lenses are roughly equal. The fastest lens that Fuji has, and it's not my opinion, it's certainly so a fact, and that is the 90mm f2 Fujifilm lens. Quad linear motors, extremely fast lens. So here we have the slow pokes back here. I should have introduced the 56mm 1.2 since I have 11 prime lenses out here. roughly right about the same, however, a wee bit slower than the 35 f2 and the 23mm f2 and the new 50mm f2. Wee bit slower, the 56mm f1.2. Just a wee slower. How much slower? Actually, on average, I noticed to be about 10% slower. However, at f-stops below f2, you actually do obviously have a much more shallow depth of field, so obviously acquisition of the target under f2, which these 50mm f2, 23mm f2, and 35mm f2 do not have the capability of. Obviously so, it is going to be slower, but even at f2 and above, I've noticed that the 56mm, and it is a portraiture lens, I mean it's not for action, so ultimately who gives a damn? But it seems to be about 10% slower than the 35, the 23, and the 50mm f2. However, of these four, the 50mm f2 is unquestionably fastest of the four. The 90mm being the fastest. The super slow pokes, not only slow but noisy, are the 60mm f2.4 and the 27mm f2.8. Almost equally as fast, and by equally as fast I mean equally slow, are some of the older lenses. However, the 16mm f1.4 is definitely so Fujifilm's best lens. Like, well, that may not be the focal length that you want to particularly use. All in all, if you're a roundabout shooter, the 16mm f1.4 is Fujifilm's best lens. However, these four with their stepper motors, the 35mm 1.4, the 23mm f1.4, and the 14mm 2.8, actually the 14mm 2.8 is the slowest of the four, unquestionably so. Also, not a very desirable lens. The only reason I bought the 14mm 2.8 is I found it extremely cheap. I don't recommend buying that to anybody. It's like, well, I want to shoot landscapes. I thought about buying the 14mm. Don't do it. I can't recommend the 14mm really at all unless you find it incredibly cheap. Is the image rendition on the 14mm 2.8 really good? Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, when you're talking about the Fujifilm lenses, they're all great, so to say. So we're talking about the ugliest women in a crowd full of pretty women. 16mm f1.4, certainly Fujifilm's best lens. These are all about equally as fast, meaning equally slow. 23mm 1.4, 35mm 1.4, and 16mm f1.4, with the 14mm 2.8 being the slowest of those four. So now we've gone over speed, and let's go over noise. The quietest of these lenses, I'm just going to group them, certainly so. Let's go off the noisiest, 60mm and 28mm, as I told you. Equally as quiet, 56mm, 23mm, and 35mm and 23mm f2. Even quieter still, just by a hair, it is definitely so quieter, is the 50mm f2. The quietest lens of these is the 90mm f2. However, since it actually uses quad linear motors, when you actually have it hanging off of the front of your camera, when the camera is off, the actual focusing element will actually shift back and forth, so try to keep the camera either down or all the way up so it doesn't constantly throw back and forth inside of the barrel. That's one of the very, very minor downsides of that sort of autofocus mechanism, which doesn't have gears, so it has quite a few advantages, but it definitely does have one disadvantage. Noisy, 14mm, equally noisy. 23mm f1.4, noisy. 35mm, not only do you have a noisy autofocus, you also have aperture chatter, rather significant aperture chatter. The quietest of these four over here, and they stand in a group of their own, the 16mm f1.4, which is certainly a more recent addition to the Fujifilm lineup. So that's it for noise. For video, the only lenses here that I would recommend for video, certainly the absolute dead last, would be the 60mm 2.4 and the 27mm 2.8. The 35mm is fine, so is the 23, so is the 50, so is the 56, however rather undesirable given its focal length, also to the 90mm, but they are quiet for continuous autofocus and video use on the Fujifilm X Pro 2, X-T20, and X-T2. Portraiture and Action. Let's start off with action. Of these, cropping in on the crop sensor, 90mm, what do we have, like 135mm basically equivalent. The 90mm f2, that's what the zoom lenses from Fujifilm are for, but as far as for action, in no particular order, the 90mm f2, it is the fastest autofocus, and it also is the most ideal of all of Fujifilm's prime lenses for autofocus. for action. Next would be the 50mm f2, and actually there is no other next. We have the 23 for street and the 35mm f2, which is a 50mm field of view equivalent. So those are actually the only two lenses of Fujifilm's prime lenses that I would even think of using for action. The 90mm f2 and the 50mm f2. 50mm f2 we have a field of view of basically 75mm and 135mm basically. On the 90mm f2, a field of view on the crop sensor of the Fujifilm X-T2, X-T20, and X-Pro 2. For portraiture, the slow noisy lens, which doesn't really matter a damn when it comes to portraiture, and a best buy, so there's a lot of these that people get rid of on eBay, is the 60mm 2.4. 60mm 2.4 has better bokeh than the 56mm f1.2 has at equivalent f2.4, f2.8. So both of these at f2.4, f2.8, let's just say the 60mm is actually a superior lens. It is the poor man's so to say. I mean, it's not a cheap lens. You can usually find these for like $350 used on eBay. It actually is a better portraiture lens at 2.4 than the 56mm is. For portraiture, actually, I almost never grab for the Fujifilm 56mm f1.2. However, that shallow depth of field and creamy bokeh is nice. Far superior to it, better micro contrast, far better bokeh, is the Voigtlander 58mm. However, obviously you do have to buy an adapter for that, and that is a $400 lens. It is also a manual focus lens, and it is a Nikon mount. However, for portraiture, I would actually always choose the 58mm f1.4 Voigtlander over anything here. 60mm, while it is slow and noisy in autofocus, for portraiture, who gives a damn? I mean, we're not talking about tracking squirrels on crack. For portraiture, okay, for street, perfectly valid, depends on what you do. Even the 56mm 1.2 is almost ideal for street in certain situations. I actually see some special artistic uses at f1.2, however that would not be ideal for any sort of moving subjects. To capture that shallow depth of field for whatever sort of composition that you want street-wise with a really shallow depth of field, however very few people do that. 23mm f2, which is a 35mm field of view. Most street photographers will admit if they only have one lens glued to their camera, it would be a 35mm. That's on a full frame. This is a 35mm field of view on the APS-C crop sensor of Fujifilm. That's a 23mm f2. Equally valid, however, of the two that I would actually choose, not even the 35, I would actually choose the 50mm f2 and the 23mm f2 as the best street lenses for Fuji. Now, is that my personal subjective opinion? It certainly is, but I have all of Fujifilm's prime lenses except for the 18mm, which absolutely sucks. I got a lot of flack for that, but Fujifilm is coming out with a second version of that, so apparently I am accurate since Fujifilm is redesigning that lens, and Fujifilm would not redesign that lens if it did not suck. So, that's it for street. So we've covered speed, noise, video, street, portraiture, and action, and that's going over all the Fujifilm lenses except for a couple. And let's place these out of the way. Here is a grapefruit. It makes an absolutely horrible Fujifilm lens. I do not recommend mounting that to your camera or with an adapter. It doesn't seem to take very good pictures, and I don't recommend using it on any Fujifilm system. Equally as bad, if not worse, and has significantly worse bokeh than the grapefruit, is the large onion. It seems to have the absolute worst bokeh. It is a slow rendering excuse for a lens, and I don't recommend using it on any Fujifilm system under any circumstance with any adapter, and it seems to be absolutely horrible when you use a speed booster with the large onion mounted on your Fujifilm system. So I just wanted to mention that because I have had a few questions about people trying to adapt both the grapefruit and the onion to the Fujifilm system, and I did want to mention that those are highly improbable to get decent quality images out of them on your Fujifilm system. If you have any questions on these lenses, just let me know. I think I've gone over all the major criteria, which is speed, noise, video use, street lenses, portraiture, and action. And if you like these videos, you can drop me a buck or two. You can tell me to jump off a cliff, or you can push me off a cliff. Yeah, good luck trying that one. But whatever makes you happy, whatever tickles your pickle, let me know how I can help you. And I have used all of these lenses extensively. And I was trying to give it an objective, intelligent, logical, empirical analysis of what is best for you, because I do not want you to waste your money. If you can rent or borrow these lenses at any point in time, you certainly should. Obviously, my needs are not your needs, so I'm trying to give an objective, logical advice on which prime lenses. And I think I covered basically everything. So that's it, folks. Thank you for watching. And my Fujifilm tattoo is healing quite nicely right there. You see it? It's still in the process of healing, so it looks kind of crappy. Fujifilm.